Hi, boys and girls. Today for grammar, we are going to be working with our last chapter or our last lesson in the unit, and it's talking about negatives. And so it's lesson 33, and let's begin. So, my first question that I want to ask or that I want to talk about is what is a negative? And it's pretty simple actually, it's just a word that means no. So some examples of those words that mean no are not, never, nobody, nothing, and nowhere. Now there's also these two words at the bottom in the box that you can see. And if you remember back a few lessons, we talked about contractions, and that's what these two words are, right? We're putting two words together with an apostrophe. And the reason why they're on here is because they also are negative. They're considered negatives because they have the word not in them. Okay, so these two contractions also count as negatives when we're trying to find them in our sentences because they are made with not. Okay, so now we're going to look at, there's actually two rules when we're looking for negatives or when we're using negatives in our sentences. And the first one is super, super important. And because of that first one comes the second rule. So the first one that I bolded and put in the pink background that I don't want you to forget is that you cannot or you do not use two negatives together in one sentence. Okay? So we're going to do some examples of that in just a minute. But when you have two negatives, A, it doesn't really sound right. And B, we have to replace it with something else instead of another negative word because then it's a double negative and it doesn't make sense. So we cannot use two negative words in the same sentence, okay? And so that brings us to this point here where it says replace one negative with. So these words down here are examples of words that we can use instead of using a double negative. So we're going to have two columns underneath where we're going to talk about sentences that are not correct, that have a double negative, and then we're going to fix those sentences and have a correct column. Okay? So, an example of an incorrect sentence, something that is not right. So this sentence says, I don't want no advice. So you can see that I've bolded and highlighted in blue both of the negative words in this sentence, okay? And so we have to either take away one of these words and just leave it the way that it is, or we have to replace it with one of the words from up here, okay? So we actually have two options that we can do, and there's two different types of sentences that could be considered correct. So both of those sentences are, we could either do the first one, I don't want advice. So you just have one negative, right? You can see it right here in the blue. Just one negative and it finishes my sentence. It makes sense, right? Or in the second part of the sentence, we could add one of these words from up here in place of the double negative in our first sentence. So I don't want any advice. So that sentence still makes sense. And instead of I don't want no advice, we switched no and any, okay? So both of these sentences on the correct side are correct. You could use either one, okay? But just remember, no two negatives together in one sentence. So let's do another example. So here's the incorrect sentence. Again, I highlighted and bolded both of the negative words. I don't never give up hope. So I don't never give up hope. So there are two negatives, right? We don't want those two negatives. So we either have to do what we did in the first one, which is just take away one of the negatives, or we replace the negative. So here are two options that we could have come up with to fix our sentence. I don't give up hope, right? We took it away. Or I don't ever give up hope. So I could replace it with one of the words from up here in the sentence down at the bottom, okay? So just keep in mind that the main thing I want you to take away is you cannot use two negatives together in a sentence. So if you see them in there, that's a no-no. We have to fix it. We can't keep it in there, okay? But you could do two options. You could just leave one negative in there, or you could switch out the word, okay? So on your homework today, I know that was a really fast lesson, but on your homework today, you're just doing pages 148 and 149. And we're actually going to do an example from part A and part B together so that you know exactly what to do. It's fairly simple. There's not a ton of writing to it, okay, but you do have to remember that we can't have two negatives in one sentence. That's the one thing I want you to remember from today. So for part A, the directions say write the negative word in each sentence. So they're giving you a sentence and you need to find what the negative word is. So any of the examples from the first slide, okay? Now I'm going to give you the sentence and I'm not writing it. I'm just going to circle it, but in your book, you're going to write it on the line. So money doesn't grow on trees. So which one of those is my negative words? Hopefully you came up with doesn't, right? Remember, any of those contractions, if it has the word not in it, is a negative word, okay? So that's all you're doing for part A. You're just finding the negative in the sentence. Easy enough. Now, part B, you're writing the word in the parentheses that completes each sentence. So now, yours won't look exactly like mine, but this is number 1 in your book. So absolutely, if you want to do numbers 1 for part A and B with me, you could have paused this before I should have reminded you, but you can pause it now, go get your book, and then fill these in so that you know what to do. But part B says write the word in the parentheses that completes each sentence. These words in your book are actually at the end of the sentence, and they want you to write it in, but I'm just going to circle it on my computer. So there isn't nothing new under the sun, or there isn't anything new under the sun. Now, just reading it, we can probably tell which one sounds like it fits in the sentence better, but I want you to really think about, okay, which are any of these negative words? Yes, nothing is a negative word. Is anything? No, it's just a normal word, right? So now I have a negative in my sentence already, so automatically I know I don't want nothing because I can't have two negatives. So now I know there isn't anything new under the sun. Okay? So all you're doing is looking for those rules. Make sure that there are not two negatives in your sentence, and you can pick the other one. Okay? And then sometimes there might not be a negative, but you have to find the right option in your sentence. Okay? So read them carefully, read through the examples again if you need help, and take your time. And then after this lesson, we'll have a day off tomorrow to study, and then we'll take a test on adjectives and adverbs on Thursday. So you'll get a little bit of a break tomorrow just to kind of review, and remind your parents that I put up all the answer keys on